Hello folks, Dragonkeeper 96600 here. I'm really excited for this week's comic review, but before we get to that, I do want to mention something that I mentioned last week. So remember how I said that I was missing a few issues of the comic, but I was waiting for them to come in the mail? Well, they have come. So now I have read every single issue that has been released so far of the Invader ZIM comic. Of the 6 issues I received in the mail this week, they were all excellent, but perhaps the most exciting is the latest issue, number 46? Yes, number 46, which was released in August last month. And what's exciting about it is that this is actually the first issue of a 4-issue arc. So we've only had one other 4-part arc in the series, but now we're just starting another one, and I'm not going to mention what happens in this issue, but it looks like it's going to be a pretty fun arc. Like, I'm excited to read the rest of it. So, that's going on. So even if you haven't read the rest of the comic, I'm pretty sure you could just pick up this, and if you're reasonably familiar with the series, you'll be able to enjoy it. But, I digress. We're not here to talk about issue 46. Tonight we're talking about issue 5, which was released quite a while ago. Wow, I might be reviewing these comics for a while if I want to catch up, but never mind. So you know how last issue 4 was mostly centered on Zim and Dib only barely appeared? Well, now it's the other way around. This issue was mainly centered on Dib and Zim barely appears. So very Dib membrane heavy issue, and actually due to me not giving specific enough instructions to my dad around Christmas time, I actually have 2 of these. So, this issue has 3 variant covers. I have 2 of which. The first, right here, was actually done by Jonan Vasquez. So, if you look at this cover, you'll see that it is pixelated, because you have eyes and you know what pixels are. Jonan has been doing a lot of pixely art. Not a lot, but you can sometimes see his work on Twitter. It usually involves just pixelizing his own characters, and I do like the colors in this one and how simple the design is. The other cover was done by Aaron Alexievich and one other artist, Savannah Gonacho. I hope I pronounced that right. And it's much more indicative of what the issue is actually about, though it has the essential elements of Gaz and games. And from both of these covers, though, you could probably tell that this is a very Gaz-centric issue as well, though Gaz is not actually the protagonist, as was the case in some past episodes of the show. Gaz is very much the antagonist. I hope I said protagonist before. Sometimes when I talk fast, I get those 2 words mixed up. But regardless, what's interesting about this issue is, first of all, it was written by Jonan, so this is, like, not filtered through another writer. This is very much Jonan's vision, as it were, for these characters, or at least a story of what Jonan thinks is funny/cool. Second of all, this issue actually sort of marks, I think, a transitional period for Gaz's character. So something that you'll hear a lot in the wake of Enter the Florpus about Gaz is that Gaz is now a sort of, I don't want to say sweeter, but a less violent and angry person than she was in the show, especially in her relationship with Dib. She's much less angry, psychotic person living in your house and more angry sister living in your house. She treats Dib much more like a sibling would, and actually has his back and is more of an ally than she was just this void of hate and unapproachability that she was in the cartoon. And a lot of people say that this portrayal comes from the comics. Yes and no. First of all, Gaz's design in Enter the Florpus is from the comics, with the green t-shirt and little skirt and whatnot. But her portrayal as a nicer person actually starts after this issue, because in this issue, she's very much full swing the angry little ball of darkness that she was in the show. And it's only after this that she mellows out. So it's weird because the early portrayals and issues 1 and 2 did seem to, especially issue 1, because Gaz wasn't really in issue 2 that much, did seem to portray Gaz as more of a sister aligned with the movie, but then for this one point, it actually goes back up to the super sadism that the comic has been trying to avoid up to that point. I might go a little bit into why maybe that is, but for now, let's just talk about the plot. So basically, it opens with Gaz playing a video game, which is what she does when she isn't punching Dib. The game in question is, we don't actually see what it is, but it's a VR system that seems quite impractical. You actually like have to get up and walk around when you're wearing it, which, as we all know, is a disaster for VR. But anyway, Dib interrupts her because he's focused on his own paranormal shit, and he turns off the game while she's playing. Now, keep in mind, this is an online multiplayer game. Mamorpaga, I think is what it's called. I swear I'm a gamer. But anyway, he asks her to pause it, which, like, is the ultimate, like, ignorant parent thing to say to your kid playing a video game. And when she doesn't, he just turns it off and, like, drags her in to watch some footage of Zim, which is this weird habit of Dib's, is that he doesn't seem to realize how much of a threat his sister truly is, that he keeps doing this and not realizing that there will be consequences for pissing her off. But what happens next is a little bit unexpected, and it takes the comic a while to get to what's actually going on. So Dib wakes up the next morning, and his house seems perfectly normal until some heavily armed-looking cyborgs break into his house. And they drag him outside, and he turns out, though the inside of his house is normal, the outside looks like a sort of Mad Max-style wasteland where everybody worships video games. Yeah, that escalated quickly, but it's Invader ZIM, so it makes sense. I also like the quick joke that Professor Membrane actually agreed to hand Dib over in exchange for a sum of money because they threatened to take Fudio away. And it's more in the sadism that I'm talking about with this issue, but this exchange will kind of make sense, or at least be a little bit easier to take as we move on and find out, what's going on in the issue. So, Dib, who has been kidnapped by the head cyborg named Lord Voxelrot, has dragged into this tower thing, and he's labeled an NPC, so don't think anybody who watches my channel wouldn't know what an NPC is. But basically, in this world, people who don't game are seen as worthless scum. So they're locked into this sort of Matrix-style pod where they're forced to live as player characters and let other gamers control their actions within the game world. Sort of, which makes the NPC label not make sense, because it's not that they're non-player characters. They are the player characters. They're just not the players. Whatever. So, this is, I think, the main reason Jonan wanted to write this issue, is because Jonan himself is a gamer, something that, again, if you look on his Twitter, you will notice very quickly. Just a few weeks ago, he tweeted about how he wasn't going to step outside his home, again, because Control just came out, so he'll be busy with Control. So, that's the thing. So, a lot of the games that Dib is thrown into are very, thinly, not really disguised pastiches of existing games. So, he gets thrown into Minecraft first. It's called something else, but it's clearly Minecraft. There's no mistaking. Like, the zombies even have the same color palette. Of course, every time he dies in the game, he dies in real life. No. What actually happens is he just gets brought back out and then put into a different game. So we get, tons of different video game parodies in this one issue, like The Binding of Isaac, Angry Birds, Call of Duty, Dark Souls, and my personal favorite game parody is an Animal Crossing parody called Creditor Debt Simulator, where Dib dies because the Tom Nook XP has his legs broken for failing to pay. And that is the type of parody that shows someone who is not only deeply familiar with the original work being parodied, but has been traumatized by it, as we all have.
Holy jeez, are you fucking stalking me?
The whole time he's in these simulations, Lord Voxelrot, who is what's the exact term? Game master. So he's Captain N, I guess, but he's the leader of this world, and he keeps taunting Dib on a creepily personal level about how he's being forced to do this because non-gamers make life difficult for gamers because they don't understand, and he can't just let Dib not game because people like Dib don't just let gamers game, and it's all very personal and deep-seated hatred because, of course, Lord Voxelrot is actually Gaz, operating a kind of cyborgy suit. And this revenge plan sounds insane even when I try to describe it. she got Professor Membrane to build a machine that will let her access different dimensions so she could find a dimension where people worship gaming and use it to torture Dib by locking him in a simulation where he's forced to actually live out video game deaths. Because he made her turn off her game. Because he doesn't care about what she does. So this portrayal is weirdly harsh for the comic and for the character that Jonan says he wants Gaz to be, and the character that she is from this point on, because after this issue, she doesn't really do anything this violent or mean to Dib again. But first thing I want to say about this is it is consistent with the show, where Gaz has been known to swear vengeance on people for doing things, some of which are very minor.
Dib, you will not know the meaning of peace, for I shall rain misery down upon your pizza-stealing heart!
The other thing I want to mention is that according to early synopses, and as confirmed by Joan in a later interview, this issue was actually supposed to have Zim as the antagonist and not Gaz. The idea was that Zim would be locking Dib into these simulations to torture him. But that was cut because, or at least not cut, but swapped in for Gaz, because Jonah was afraid that it was too similar to an existing episode, Dib's Wonderful Life of Doom, where, again, Zim locks Dib into a simulation. Not to say that the simulation idea won't be revisited in the comics at all, but this might explain why Gaz's behavior is so sadistic in this issue, because her role was actually originally written for Zim. So Gaz has been inserted into the psychotic villain role. Now, there is an arc to the comic that I feel like makes sense with Gaz. Like, the story, it's not just Gaz is playing Zim's role because Zim couldn't come in today. Like, the story has clearly been retooled with Gaz the antagonist, setting up the arc about Dib not caring about what his sister does and being very self-absorbed, as he is, and then by the end, learning to care. Though, and there's this scene where he apologizes to Gaz, for not taking her interests seriously and not thinking that what he does is more important than what she loves, but it's kind of cheapened and it doesn't quite get the sour taste out of viewers' mouths because, or readers' mouths in this case, because A, he was stuck with a player who made him tase himself in the pants for hours. It wasn't because he actually learned his lesson, it was more like the lesson was, like, branded into him. 2, it ends on a note where Dib offers to play video games with Gaz. Gaz says she'd like that. We cut forward to where Dib actually beats Gaz in a round, at which point she violently throws him through the wall. So all of this is more in line with, I keep repeating myself over and over, but more in line with Gaz's portrayal with the show, where she's less a sister and more this eldritch creature that you don't want to cross. She's so intense that even Zim is scared of her.
I'm trying to draw a little piggy. Can't you see I'm trying to draw a little piggy?
Now, even though the wonky characterization can pose some sort of, I guess, conceptual problems, there are still some pretty great character-based jokes in here. For instance, when Gaz wants to bring the ultimate pain to Dib, guess who she brings in to play him?
It's me! I was the turkey all along!
So, remember when I said about Dib being forced to tase himself over and over for hours? Yeah, Gura was in control when he did that. Gura's also who gets his legs broken in the Animal Crossing parody and all kinds of other madness. And just, even before you see the resulting pain and suffering that Dib suffers, that panel of them rolling Gura out toward the console while you see Dib's big no speech bubble in the corner, that is hilarious. Like, you don't even need to see what happens next. Just show Gura at that moment and you get a laugh. I also like how Gaz got Professor Membrane to agree to help her find an alternate dimension. Like, he basically asked, like, why should I do this? And she says, I don't know, for science or something. And He's immediately on board when she says it's for science. And I just love the way these speech bubbles are written, is that I can actually hear the way Roger Bumpus would say the line.
I'm glad you two have arrived. The ceremony... Wait! Where's your brother?
One thing that's kind of interesting is that, in a strange way, because of the multiverse thing, this comic does function as a sort of bizarre kind of foreshadowing for Enter the Florpus, since it shows Gaz visiting multiple worlds, all of which are slightly different. She even comments at one point that messing around with alternate realities can have disastrous consequences, and that she's seen some shit by trying to do this. Could this, in fact, be foreshadowing for the mayhem that Zim wreaks when he opens the Florpus? Well, the comic was released around 2015, so perhaps the Enter the Florpus was in its conceptual stages at that time. We don't actually see different art styles when she goes into the different issues because we didn't have access to different artists to do the different worlds. That will come in a later issue. But as there is a bit more multiverse shenanigans in Invader ZIM, it makes me wonder, like, how much Enter the Florpus was influencing these comics even before it came out. The same page, where Gaz explains how she went to multiple worlds and saw all the weird sights there, also explains that she had to replace the previous game master in this world, whose name was Clarence Wong. Now, if you're a veteran Invader ZIM fan, you might recognize the name Clarence Wong. The reason that this name has showed up multiple times is because Clarence Wong is actually the name of a real-life old friend of Jonan Vasquez's. Jonan's. Apparently, they used to play video games together. Jonan's actual description was that they grew up playing video games together, which implies that this is a childhood friend, and that they continue to game online together. So it's pretty sweet that Jonan has referenced him not once, but at least twice in his work. However, the idea that Gaz had to get rid of Clarence, and she implies that she had to get rid of this world's version of herself and Dib too, not only makes this the longest and most convoluted revenge plot ever, aside from something Zim would come up with, it also raises the question of, are we meant to understand that Gaz killed them? Does Gaz have blood on her hands? I mean, it's the blood of people in alternate dimensions, but it's still blood. Like, these are still people that she presumably bumped off. Though, again, them being an alternate dimension does make Professor Membrane selling Dib a little more palatable, since this isn't our Professor Membrane. And he even calls Dib the wrong name, so that maybe we can go back and figure, oh, this wasn't ours. Though, again, it is hilariously subverted by him saying that he agreed to do this for science.
There are no curses, son!
Some of the parodies in this are a little weak. It's more of the thing of just kind of saying a name and but it's slightly wrong. Like, the name for the Dark Souls parody is Dank Souls, and that's basically the extent of the joke. It's more referential humor than anything. I did mention that I love the Animal Crossing parody, but a lot of, whenever Invader ZIM parodies things, it tends to be kind of on the nose about it in a way that's maybe we would have thought of as funny as kids, but now is eye-rolling. I'm not sure why the world looks like Mad Max, or why they all have vehicles that look like they'd be from Mad Max. I get this as a world where people worship gaming, but if that's the case, why would they have vehicles? They would stay inside, wouldn't they? I mean, real driving isn't a whole lot like video game driving, so if they're driving in real life the way they drive in a game, there's going to be a lot of carnage. The writing of Lord Voxelrod is also a little weird. Knowing that the character is actually Gaz, when you go back and read some of his exchanges with Dib, Voxelrod comes across as goofier or a little more lighthearted than Gaz normally is, making expressions and jokes that Gaz normally wouldn't make. It's just weird on a second read-through knowing that this is Gaz and seeing Voxelrod kind of pal around in a way that's sort of reads more like the priority was writing a Darth Vader parody than it was writing Gaz disguised as someone. Some of these exchanges are funny, but when you go back and read that, oh, it's Gaz. Again, Voxelrod is a likable antagonist and it's pretty cool, and Gaz's motivation for doing this, while ridiculously over the top, does have this kind of arc to it, is consistent of what we saw of her in the show. But there isn't a clear continuity between Voxelrot and Gaz, even though Gaz is supposed to be Voxelrot all along, and I'm just repeating myself again. Sorry about that. But I feel like I like this issue, but I do admit that it is flawed, and I feel like at the end, it might kind of leave a bad taste in some people's mouths, the way that certain episodes of Ed, Edd n Eddy would. I've talked about Ed, Edd n Eddy before on this channel. There's one episode in particular that I love and that everybody else in the EENE fandom hates, which is the Cursed Phone episode. I don't remember the title. It's probably like Dial 9 for Ed or something like that. All the episode titles of Ed in there. But it's basically the one where Eddie finds a cursed phone and every time he answers it, something terrible happens to him. I love that episode because of its slapstick. A lot of people hate it because Eddie is just being punished over and over for something he can't help.
Eddie's in pain now. He'll have to call you back.
First of all comedy relies on sadism. Like, somebody has to get hurt, someone, either their feelings or their body, or something has to be unexpected, or something has to not go the way that someone would expect it or want it to go. But there is kind of this weird line that a lot of sadist shows like Invader ZIM or Ed, Edd n Eddy, or even something like Ren and Stimpy have to cross. Like, when does something become so cruel that it's actually not funny anymore? Tom and Jerry, that's another show that also struggles with this, where it has episodes where, like, that end with Tom getting executed via, what's it called? The guillotine. Like, that actually disturbed me when I saw it as a kid. You've got to have pathos for a character so that you can be invested in their story. But where is the line where the pathos gets in the way of you actually laughing at the character? Supposedly, as I've heard it said, this was why Jonan softened up on how the other two membranes, Professor, what's his name, and Gaz, treat Dib in the comics and Enter the Florpus as opposed to the movie. Not just because Jonan's sensibilities of what he wants in his characters have probably changed as he's gotten older, but also because sadism isn't funny if it's all sadism all the time. There has to be something nice or sweet, or at least kind of warm, or at least calm, to juxtapose the sadism with. The reason I refer to this comic as a transitional period is it's not quite there yet. The foundation for the sweetness has been laid, but the old way of writing the characters is coming back for that same comedy. And as a result, the comic, especially as to where it's situated in Invader ZIM timeline, I don't even know if the comics are have enough of a continuity for you to refer to them as a timeline. But basically, the placement of it historically in these changing portrayals of the family does make it a little weird in that regard. But, as usual, there are some great jokes, the art is great, and even when the parodies don't work, there is some value to point and say, ha, I know that game, even if it is cheap. And again, the Critter Debt Simulator, that's genius parody. So if we have to go through several shallow parodies to get to that one, then that's fine. And most of these parodies are only one panel, so it's not like we're spending a whole lot of time with them. Regardless, that's issue 5. Next issue will be a guest issue. So we'll be able to talk about how a new artist interprets Invader ZIM for the first time. So that's the review. Hope you enjoyed it. This is DragonKeeper 96600 signing off.